None of us are born as blank slates. We're born with genetic programming, ancestral memories, and energetic imprints from other lives. However, children are typically less conditioned when they're born into a particular culture than the adults around them. And in that way, I say that children are humanity's guiding lights. They often have their instincts intact. If you look at what a child wants to do, they chase joy, actively chase joy. And as they grow up, they're taught not to chase joy and instead to work and chase other things which can then maybe give them joy for 2 weeks rather than seeking joy in every second and every day. So, some children are now being labelled, more so than ever before, as a tad disordered. I say they're acting out the disorder in the environment that they're in. Children are often a mirror of the environment they're in because they're sponges, they're picking up on everything. Extrasensory children, that is children who are picking up on more senses than the traditional 5 senses, and that is touch, taste, sound, smell, sight. They're getting their information from other places. It is these children who are struggling in that traditional 5 sense world, with adults who are usually very entrenched in the 5 sense world, and then so forth cannot understand why a child may be acting out. Oh, there must be something wrong with them. No one ever thinks, oh, is there something wrong with the environment? And in that way, extrasensory children can be seen as humanity's guiding lights. We can liken them to a canary. Coal miners used canaries to, when they went down those dark tunnels, because the canary would pick up on the toxins, the dangers. They'd sense it way before the coal miners could sense it. Now, do we carry on going down that dark tunnel, or do we listen to the children, the humanity's canaries, who are saying, don't go down that tunnel, you may not come back the same? Do we listen to them, or do we tell them to listen to us? Which is sort of typically what I guess parents have been trained to do and model, like, no, listen to me, I know best. But is this environment we find ourselves in the best for us? I'm not sure. I think there are many better ways. And this is why I say we listen to what children, especially extrasensory children, have to say. Now, what are some of the symptoms that are typically, you can either call it a disordered child or, as I call it, an extrasensory child? What are their symptoms? And symptoms are simply a way of expressing discomfort. And children especially are mirrors. They act out the unsaid. They're typically mirroring a disorder in the environment. Is it better to have a child who obediently just takes on what it may not feel to be right? Or is it better to have a child who actively reacts against what it does not believe to be right? Extrasensory children are usually allergic to denser vibrations. So what could encompass a denser vibration? Artificial junk processed food, definitely a denser vibration than sort of lighter, organic, brighter food. I say it's a good thing that these children are expressing symptoms against what is essentially poison, rather than a typical child who could maybe tolerate artificial ingredients more. That body of that child is not telling them straight away it's poison, or if it has done that, it's been numbed. or suppressed. The typical symptoms, like that an extrasensory child would have. Often in males, it's speech delay. Why are they not speaking? No one asks that. Usually they get, if they're not speaking by a certain age, they're onto a waiting list to get trained to speak. Speak when their brain isn't actually ready to speak yet. Why? Why don't we ask the questions why is this child not speaking? Usually if there's a weakness in one area, there's a huge strength in another. If we look at some of the most well-known inventor types in human history, in recent human history, it could be Einstein or Thomas Edison. Both were seen as highly disordered when they were in those lower years in school. Unteachable. Einstein didn't speak in his first few years. Why? They're picking up on other senses, other streams of information. They're not simply obeying. If they were obeying types, regurgitating textbooks, they'd never have the capacity to make new leaps and think of other ways of approaching things. Usually highly creative, inventive types are extrasensory. They're not the typical obedient child who gets all the gold stars. Gold stars are like little rewards for saying yes, you're being conditioned correctly on the conveyor belt of life. So the delayed speech. So there are theories that particularly in boys, if they are highly physical, usually their body has focused on that more than speech. And also if they have engineering type brains, that piece of the brain which is into engineering, like the kind of building things or physics, I think maybe music as well. If that's going to be their strength in life, and we're all meant to be different, none of us are meant to be good at everything. If you look at an indigenous tribe, if you had a tribe with 10 really good warriors, well then that tribe would likely not survive, because what happens in the times where there's no war? What do they do then? And if they're warriors, they're going to constantly be wanting to war, and then they're likely to sort of succumb to that war eventually. Whereas if you had a tribe that had a mixture of sort of different types of people, so that would be, you have one warrior type, you'd have a really good hunter, you'd have a carpenter who could build the huts, you'd have a herbalist, a shaman, all the different types, all the different skills, and usually a different passion excites everyone. That tribe is far more likely to survive than a tribe who is all the same, either just 10 warriors or a tribe with 10 herbalists, because what are those herbalists going to do in a war, for instance, in a battle? It's good to be different. It's not great to be uniform ever. We're human, we express ourselves in different ways. So some boys in particular are more inclined to be engineer types, and if that's the case, that part of the brain usually grows quite big and dominant, and it's right next to the speech part. And so because it's so dominant, it sort of suppresses the speech part. And that is who they're meant to be. They're meant to see the world in that way. My son was that was very typical for him. And when I was under pressure to get him to go to speech therapy, which he didn't, and he speaks now, he managed to do it by himself without the training. He just didn't do it at the time everyone else was doing it. It doesn't matter. It's not a race. All do it in our own ways, in our own times. But when I sort of told those adults who are obsessed with fitting him in a box, I was like, well, look how good he is at numbers. You haven't seen his strength. You're just focusing on his weakness. Look at his strengths. They were like, oh, and I'd never taught him numbers. He just could pick up on it. I mean, he was picking up on mathematical concepts which were quite spiritual. as well. They weren't formulaic or what you're typically taught in schools. So when they noticed that, and he went to an alternative kindergarten, when they noticed that, they kind of left it then. They agreed with me and they left us alone. And eventually he was speaking. And so what we see usually in children who aren't speaking early is, they've got strengths in other areas. And why aren't they speaking? Personally, I know a few children who are extrasensory or did have some sort of speech delay, and usually they are highly telepathic. Now, that does not set them apart from the rest of humanity. It's actually a sort of prime, original way of being for humans. Most beings who aren't human are telepathic. It just gets conditioned out of us to sort of listen to our own voices and not believe the walls of separation, basically. That's what telepathy is. If we look at another symptom of a disordered child who, in my opinion, is only acting out the disorder in the environment, you could see now if a child spins in circles, that is on the list of, okay, they probably have a disorder. I remember spinning in circles as a child. My child used to do it. He never does it now. But what a child is doing when they're spinning in circles is they're realigning their chakras. Often children can be quite ungrounded. They're still, they say that you really only settle into your body when you're around 7. So they're still settling in their grounding, and spinning in circles is a way of realigning their chakras so they could ground back into our reality. I say there's nothing wrong with spinning in circles. And then if we look at the typical sort of like stimming acts, which would be like walking on the tiptoes or a child banging its head against the wall. Now there's really interesting things I've seen about that, which when a therapist comes in, a very open-minded therapist comes into that family with the child banging its head against the wall, they now look to the parents, and if they're open-minded parents and self-reflective parents, they will go with it. If they're the type of parents who go, no, it's my way or the highway, and say everything else is wrong, not me, I'm right, they're not going to go with it. But when the therapist works with self-reflective adults, they will not even look at the child and say that child is disordered. They will ask the parents, what is it about your life that makes you feel that you've been banging your head against a wall? And that could be anything. That could be just stress or financial stuff, whatever. And when these adults have addressed what they feel they've been banging their head against a wall about, the child stops banging their head against the wall. It's never about the child. They are acting out the unsaid. They are mirroring their disordered environment. And as soon as the environment gets fixed, they become harmonized. So in that way, they are steering us away from disharmony and leading the way into harmony. If only we listen to them. Or if we go down the other road and say it's them that's disordered, it's not the world will only become more disordered as we're trying to get all of these children, especially the extrasensory children, to fit into a misaligned world. Powerful stuff, eh? Let's listen to them as mindful parents. What do these children have to say? Personally, I've seen it with my child. Whenever I am in a state of like calm and bliss and happiness, he is, and he's very easy and calm and stable. And whenever there's times where I feel stressed or anxious, I try to hide it and just be like, so he doesn't see. He can feel it, and this is what I mean by extrasensory children. They're picking up on senses that they can't see, smell, or touch. They're feeling it in a way that has been conditioned out of many of us. And he will act chaotic and anxious, and that's sort of like, it amplifies the stress of the environment. He's acting out the unsaid of what I'm feeling inside. Soon as I fix that within myself, he becomes stable again. it is not the children that are disordered, it's the environment, and they are the mirrors of that. Yeah, I've seen it firsthand many times. And yeah, do we listen to them, or do we try and put them in a box? Do we try and make them speak when they don't want to speak? I'm certainly not. They are extrasensory children are a gift and a way to realign with ourselves.